Right, good morning everyone. It's 10 o'clock. We'll make a start. Welcome all. My name is Councillor Matthew Hall and I'm Chairman of Dorset Council's Audit and Governance Committee. First item on the agenda is apologies. We'll do that via a roll call for today, please. So when I call out your name, can you please put your microphone camera on and introduce yourselves. Bill Pipe.
Chairman, Councillor Pipe has sent his apologies for the meeting today.
I'm still here.
Oh, sorry. I think you're going to leave early. So it's Councillor Bill Trite who's sent his apologies for today.
Yeah, Councillor Pipe is here, Chairman, but I do have a hospital appointment for 11:20, so I would need to leave at 11.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Janet Dover.
Thank you, Councillor Janet Dover, Coal Hill and Wimborne Minster East.
Morning, Janet.
Morning.
Barry Gorringe.
Good morning, Chairman. Present.
Morning, Barry. Councillor Trite has sent his apologies. Richard.
Morning, Richard Biggs, Councillor for Poundbury and Vice Chairman of the committee. Thank you.
John.
Yeah, John Orrell from Malcolm Regis. I'll briefly disappear at 11 and then rejoin.
Okay, thank you, John. Mike Parks.
Yeah, President, Mike Parks, Fernand North. I've put something in the chat. I've got some problems with my laptop on a go slow, so if I dip in and out, that's why, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Rod Adkins.
Yes, here, present, Chair. Good morning.
Morning, Rod. And finally, Susan.
Yes, present, Chairman.
Sorry, I think Matt might have meant me, Susan. Sorry,
Sorry.
A common name. Sorry, Councillor Susan Cocking, representing Portland and also Dorset Council.
Morning, Susan. On a slightly different note today, members, you won't need to put RTS in the chat bar as I think the email out to you all suggested. I will be coming around to you each in turn for questions or points of clarity for each of the agenda items, but obviously do use the RTS if there is a burning issue that you need clarification sooner rather than later. Officers, if you could introduce yourselves, please, the first time you speak on an agenda item. Right, agenda item number 2 is declarations of interest. Do we have any from members? I'll take the silence as a no. Susan, I believe we don't have any public participation from today.
No, Chairman, none, no questions or statements for the meeting today.
Thank you. Right, main crux of the meeting then today is agenda item number 4, which is the SWAP internal audit report. Over to SWAP for this report. Good morning.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. Morning, everybody. Sally White, Assistant Director, SWAP Internal Audit Services. This is our third quarterly report to the committee this year, and it's fairly routine update. We've not identified any significant corporate risks and have completed just one audit review that has resulted in a limited assurance, which was an audit of adult services direct payments. You can see the details of that review on page 6 of our report. However, I would highlight that whilst we did identify a number of issues, the good news is that we didn't find any fraudulent or erroneous use of direct payments. Our new continuous approach to the follow-up of actions is continuing to be successful, and whilst we were reporting 33 outstanding priority 1 and 2 recommendations as at the 1st of December, this figure has now further reduced, and this is a significant improvement on where we were when we first introduced our new approach in May, when there were 63. The assurance table on page 2 is showing the current internal audit assurance position, and just to clarify, we are also indicating areas where we've undertaken work that is not providing an assurance, such as advisory or grant certification work. However, all of our work does feed into our overall annual opinion, and we thought it would be useful for you to see areas where we have undertaken the non-assurance work. At the beginning of the report, I've also referenced the assurance mapping work that we've started with support from Mark Eyre. SLT have approved this work, and Jonathan Mayer has been identified as the sponsor for this. I don't think there's anything else specifically that I wanted to draw members' attention to, but obviously happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sally. Members, Councillor Bill Pipe, do you have any questions or points of clarification?
Just the one where sorry, I've forgotten the lady's name. Says they found no significant corporate risks. Does that mean that you found insignificant corporate risks?
We assess we provide an assurance around all audits, and as you can see from the report, the direct payments report there, we have there is an assurance dial which gives an indication of where we feel the assurance sits. We only identify a significant corporate risk if we feel that the risks that we've identified could have a significant impact across the whole of the council rather than just as a service risk. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it's pretty much the status quo then. So there's nothing new that's likely to appear on the horizon that might cause concern in the future.
Not at the moment, no.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Sally, if I could just follow on from that with regards to the no significant corporate risks, do you individually assess those, or is there a part within SWAP's work that you look at things collectively and you think to yourself, OK, there isn't a significant risk, but there are a number within a certain area which may pose a significant risk? Do you look at things at that level?
Potentially we could do. If we were doing a number of reviews that were connected that all raised sort of limited assurances, we might then sort of review that and see how that impacted, as you say, collectively across the whole council.
OK, thanks, Sally. Councillor Janet Dover, do you have any questions?
No questions at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Janet. Councillor Barry Gorringe.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've read the report and I'm happy with what Sally's had to say, so no questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Richard?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at page 2, which gives a good overview of audits that have been undertaken and what's outstanding, and obviously we're in a pretty good place on most of them, but there's obviously a few areas sort of outstanding yet to do. I'm thinking perhaps, you know, climate change, member officer interface and elections are all probably things that I hope there's I'd like assurance that there's something in place for that to happen within this year. The other thing would be around transformation, with the limited assurance on there, bearing in mind that transformation is key on the assumptions that have been put into the budgets for the year. That is a bit of a concern for me, really, because so much is riding on this transformation programme, producing savings and improving performance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the areas where you see we have gaps, this is where we're looking to make an assessment through the assurance mapping process. So it may well be that whilst there's no audit assurance, there could well be very comprehensive assurances elsewhere in the authority that can deliver that assurance that, you know, members are looking for. However, we do maintain a risk assessment process where we have a conversation with the directorates around the key risks, and we identify sort of gaps in our work, and we have a conversation around where audit work would be, you know, useful and sensible to take place. Does that answer your question?
Pretty much. I suppose my only slight concern is where there's work being done internally, you know, as a case of sort of marking our own homework. I think it's always, while that's useful, it's always good to have a sort of independent view looking at it. I think members feel more assured, or that they're, you know, having internal is obviously far better than having nothing. You know, I think we just like that assurance that we will perhaps look at, or at least review what work has been done internally to see if that's satisfactory. That's all really. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that would happen as part of our assurance mapping process.
Thanks, Richard. Councillor John Orell, any questions?
No questions on this paper, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Councillor Mike Parks?
Nothing for me, thank you, Chairman.
And Councillor Rod Atkins?
No questions, Chair, thank you.
Councillor Susan Cocking?
Yes, Chair, thank you. It was just one question on page 11. It was about, does the council, there's no plan to implement a method to record the reasons why direct payments and care packages end? And I just wondered, does the council intend to implement an action plan to find out why these care packages do end, and how does that compare with commission services as well, because that's all a part of the direct payments, and if we don't know why they end, then we don't know what the risk is to people who use these care packages and direct payments. So I just wondered, is there going to be an action plan that we do look at why direct payment care packages and commission services do end by the carer or the parent?
Absolutely. Can I refer this to Angie to answer, my colleague?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Angie Hooper, Principal Auditor at SWAP. Yeah, thank you for your question. Yes, absolutely. The service have agreed an action to implement a process to review the ended direct payments, and I know that they've already begun work in this area. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, would we see some of the results in the Audit and Governance Committee as to the reasons why, just for information, because I think we're dealing with very vulnerable people, and if there is misuse of direct payments or care packages, financial misuse, then that's a risk to the council and to the service user as well.
Yeah, I mean, they've only just, that this action has implementation date of the 30th of June, and I understand at the moment it's you know, so they've only just begun work on it. They are hoping to build it into a mosaic, but obviously we will follow up the action as our normal follow-up process.
Okay, thank you. Because I know in the past people have used direct payments to pay their mortgages, and it hasn't actually gone to the service user.
Yeah, I was going to say within our audit work, we didn't actually find any fraud or erroneous use within sort of the process of our audit, which is good.
Thank you for that reassurance.
Sally, finally, just a couple of points from myself, and it's more of a clarification thing. On page 1, where there is the reference to obviously the number of overdue actions, is there any specific reasons behind those overdue actions? You know, is it a resourcing issue, staffing issue, pandemic related? You know, is there a sort of a theme behind them, or is it just a general mix of reasons?
I think it's a general mix of reasons. I think some of it relates to staff that have left and need, you know, there's the replacement staff have only just started, so we'll take them some time to sort of bed in and then review the procedures. There are some others that are sort of long outstanding around housing, but again, there's been new staff in place, so it's taken a while for those staff to sort of focus on the audit actions, but we're confident that that is happening now. So we don't have any major concerns around an unwillingness to implement actions, which is good.
Okay, thanks, Sally. Next one is obviously on page 2, where you talk about the move to the more holistic assurance mapping, which I think is definitely the right way to move this. I'm just hoping and double checking that you feel that you're getting the support from Dorset Council and the senior leadership team in this move.
Yes, we took a paper to the SLT in December, and the idea of assurance mapping was supported. I think the exercise will start in areas where we've identified sort of gaps in our assurance, which is probably a sensible way to sort of start the process, and then we'll move on from there.
Thanks. Next question. Obviously on page 3, you talk about the extra sort of savings that you've been able to report to us. Is there any reason behind why you're able to pick up certain duplicate payments which our staff or the software don't appear to? Is it a question of just the detail that you go into when looking at these things?
It's the data analysis that we use, which isn't routinely undertaken within the service, although obviously they've got the software that identifies the potential duplicate payments. I think the position that the council is in now in regard to duplicate payments is sort of a huge improvement on where they were when we were talking about this probably 12 months ago. And I think all there is now is some residual issues around staff training, which the team are aware of and are sort of actively addressing now. Okay,
thank you, Sally. That's all the questions, and I don't see any other questions coming from members. So thank you to you and to Angie for this report. Members, that was just to note. Thank you. Moving now on to agenda item number 5, which is the risk management update, which will be presented by David Trotter and Mark Eyre. Members, as you can see, we got 2 recommendations here. The first one is to note and review the key risks identified in the corporate and service risk registers. And number 2 is to agree the proposal that the future quarterly reporting includes updates on emergency planning and information compliance. I see Mark's on the screen. Over to you, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, committee. I'm Mark Eyre. I'm the Service Manager for Assurance, and as the Chair mentioned, we also have David Trotter here today, who's our Risk and Resilience Officer. So this is the quarterly risk management update that you receive at the committee, and as you'll see from the paper, it includes a management update by risk owners of all risks that have been identified as either high or as extreme. Hopefully you'll agree that we're getting good progress in terms of getting these management updates. So the vast majority of the risks have been updated fairly recently. There does remain a few gaps still, but these are now far more few than what we've seen previously, and we are following those up. Just a couple of points that I wanted to mention specifically. Firstly, in terms of risk themes, we've reduced down the number of themes, and you'll notice the correlation here between the audit paper that you've just received, where we had that sort of assurance mapping page that identified the 21 risk themes and the level of assurance aligned to each. So we're looking to reduce those down. From a risk management perspective, we've already moved them down to a number of 10, and we're working with SWAP to do the same in terms of the audit plan. So all service risks will be grouped under these 10 risk theme headings. And then finally, and this relates to the second of the recommendations in the report, there's a proposal to extend the reporting to 2 other areas that sit within my assurance service. So firstly, emergency planning. back in the September meeting, there was a bit of a discussion prompted by the swap paper about emergency response and how the committee gets assurance that the response that we provide is effective. The emergency planning team engage in regular debriefs following incidents, and I discussed with the chair a little while back about possibly including within this report in future some key messages that come through from those debriefs. And then the second area is around information compliance. So again, I think it was at the September meeting again where information compliance risk was referenced and agreed post-meeting that an overview should come through to the committee at this stage. So I'm just proposing as part of that that we include some sort of key messaging on information compliance as a further appendix to this paper. And that was the key points I was going to raise, Chair, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Councillors, questions. Susan Cocking, any questions?
Yes, Chair. Sorry, I did send them in advance as well. The risk item, risk 286, it says about phishing, social engineering. Could you explain what you mean by when in training, what needs maturing? I just sort of wanted to know what that sort of looks like. And as in parts of this, as in other parts of this report, it seems that training uptake is low amongst some staff. And further down in the same section, it sort of says target score is 12. And how does that compare to our target score now?
Thanks, Chair.
This is about cyber attacks and
okay.
Put the risk to the council.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Cocking. I'll pass over in a minute to David to pick up on the phishing risk, because I know he has had an update on that one. But just on in terms of the wider issue around training, and I think you mentioned previously about the data protection training, which is showing a fairly low level of training response.
Yeah, that was going to be in my next
report.
Yeah,
right.
I know
Okay.
you wanted to do the two risks together. That's risk 286 as well.
Fine. Okay. I mean, if I respond back on that one, if I may, because that was showing sort of a fairly low level of training response. So that was at the time of writing the report, it was 50% of people having undertaken the mandatory training, and it's been a bit of a slow journey getting that rate of training improved. But actually, as of the end of last month, it's now up to 70%. So we've seen a real positive increase there through some sort of targeted messaging around training. And just for sort of a bit of a reassurance there, in terms of those training packages, all managers should actually have details within the training package, which identifies all the staff that work to them and those mandatory elements of training that they need to undertake, and to what extent those elements of training have been undertaken. So in terms of the specific one around data protection, it's certainly shown a significant improvement, but obviously it's still something that we need to continue to pursue to move that up to the full 100%.
Thank you, Mark. And as I say, we're talking about risk 388. And
yeah.
How does that compare to other areas of training within the council? If this has moved from 50 to 70%, how does this compare to other areas of training within the staff and councillors as well? Because we as councillors have to do training, and are just concerned that, you know, if we have cyber attacks and phishing and social engineering, how does that compare with other areas of training within the council?
I don't have the details on in terms of training in general, Councillor Cocking, but I'm sure that's something which we can look at by liaising with our learning and development team and see how those sort of mandatory training levels do compare, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. If I could just add there, Mark, it would be very useful, I think, for this committee, but also for the council in general, for us to be aware of the levels of take up on the mandatory training, whatever that training involves, and for us to have a plan on how we increase those numbers to the what most people would perceive to be the necessary 100% take up.
Yeah, that makes sense, Chair. So I will take that away as an action and talk to our human resources colleagues, if I may.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else, Susan?
I don't know if it was just the agenda item, because I did get a reply from David as well, and I didn't know whether, oh, that was the data protection. So yeah, no, that's fine, Chair, thank you. It's the training.
Okay,
Training concerns me, but I don't know if David wants to say anything about the comment that I made to him in my email prior to this meeting. But yeah, I think training is really relevant because it stops us at risk from lots of untoward issues.
As Susan's mentioned it, David, do you want to take this opportunity to give an answer to the question that she posed?
Yes, Chairman, of course. So I'm David Trotter, I'm the Risk and Resilience Officer. In regards to the risk 286, which is currently rated scored as an extreme, so the update is the training rates are currently around about 94%. And there's a number of we all undertake the training, as Councillor Cockins referred to currently. That we have a number of simulated attacks, so you'll get an email through phishing type thing, so you can click on it. And the idea is that we've all undertaken our training, and we will recognise that this is an attack, and we won't click on the link. And things are improving, definitely. And the expectation is such that within the next 12 months, we expect the shift of this extreme rated risk to maybe a medium and a high. So we're looking at a projected score, a target score of 12, which is a massive improvement. And moving on from there, in the report we've got a roadmap. So I know that the Vice Chairman would be pleased with this. We're looking to incorporate more of a residual risk look in the future. So those risks which are rated, scored extreme and high, will have a target score against those as well. So we hopefully will incorporate in the future reports, say around about April or May. But I hope that sort of answers the question. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Next, Councillor Rod Atkins, any questions?
Not from me, Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Rod. Councillor Mike Parks.
My question, funny enough, was around training, and I think we've discussed that in enough depth. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor John Orell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of things. One is on getting the climate to be a bit more pervasive. It does come up around highways, but I think the impact of climate and emergencies could be a bit more pervasive and affect people. So in particular, I did word searches for heat waves, which are, I think, is a major risk to public health. So perhaps in subsequent reports that those kind of tabs, climate change, health impacts, might be picked up. The other one was risk 343, which is providers of social care. We're seeing across the country that a lot of people are being left without social care provision for a variety of reasons. And I note in our report here that Tricuro is seen as our redemption to that, our provider of last resort. But as we all know, Tricuro is maybe leaving Dorset Council's service, which then leaves us with a hole on 343. And not just a hole in terms of provision, a hole in terms of a budget hit. So just a few things that need sorting out there. Thank you.
Any comments, Mark?
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. I'm just picking them up separately. So in terms of the climate change one, what you'll see as part of the committee would just be those risks that are identified as high and extreme. So there may be other risk areas that you're not seeing in front of you that are reflected within the risk register. But I will take that comment back to we have regular catch-ups with the place management team. So I'll make sure we do pick up on that as part of those discussions. The second question around the Tricuro risk, I would have to go back and take that to the risk owner for the comment, I think, but we can certainly do that and feed that back to you.
If you could, thank you. Richard Biggs.
I've just got one which jumps out at me, and I only sort of noticed it this morning really, and that's on risk 339, which is around adult social care area, impact on hospital pressures. And I'm just wondering, depending on which way you look at that, which end of the telescope, you know, is that risk actually worded correctly? Because if you were from the hospital's perspective, it's our inability to provide the social care once they leave hospital that is preventing them leaving, not hospital pressures. And I understand obviously with COVID there is greater hospital, but these are people who should be released but can't be released because we can't provide them the support. So I think if you were the NHS looking at this, you'd say this is worded wrong. I wonder if are they content with that? Is there a communication issue that needs resolving? You know.
Okay, no, thanks, Chair and Councillor Biggs. Again, I'm happy to take that back, have that discussion with the risk owner. Yeah, no problem at all.
If you could, Mark, and then let the committee know the answers, that would be great. Councillor Barry Gorringe, any questions?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I picked up on the points that Richard's just made about hospital discharges and bed blocking, and also the lack of places in care homes as well. That was another issue, because we've noticed that there's been several care homes that have closed down. So obviously that means less and less positions for people once they come out of hospital. The other thing is as well, I believe the council actually are self-insure. In other words, all their buildings and the vehicles are all covered by the council's own insurance. How do we rate that as a risk?
We self-insure to a degree, so we actually have quite high levels of self-insurance, but there's a sort of a protective layer that sits on that, sort of like a bit like I guess what we have is like a large insurance excess as such, which means that we manage risk within that sort of insurance excess level, but we do have insurance cover for the higher, more extreme levels of risk. So that therefore means that from a risk perspective, as per the way that we score it here, it's not within those high levels, because that insurance cover pretends to sort of protects us against the more extreme elements, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was just thinking, going back to what was about 18 months ago when we had that large fire down at Weymouth, the depot, when all the council trucks all got destroyed. You know, did we cover that? Did the council cover that?
It's probably not right for me to fully comment, because it's not within my service area, Councillor Gorringe, but I mean, certainly, as I say, there will be an element of that which would have been picked up through the insurance arrangements, and some of it would have been sort of self-insured.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I've just noticed that in the chat bar it's been put up a question from Jim McManus asking whether it's worthwhile recirculating the presentation that Dave Watson gave in response to the fire event. I would say, Jim, yes, please. Councillor Janet Dover, any questions?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm concerned about the emergency response that was talked about earlier on this today, and also an appendix on key messages. I just wanted more information on that, please.
Thank you. Yep, I'm more than happy to do that, Councillor Dover. So essentially, whenever we have an emergency response to any event, so it could be a weather event, it could be if we take, for instance, something like Wareham Forest fire, or just the COVID response being another one. As a matter of course, through our emergency planning arrangements, we will always hold debriefing sessions, and those will have a look at those things that have worked well throughout the response, those things that haven't worked so well, and those things that we could be doing better. So as a result of that, from following on from those sessions, we will always build up a sort of an action plan of things that we believe we could respond to better in future. So ordinarily, certainly from my experience so far with these, in the vast majority of the messages that come through in terms of the response is a very positive one. But I think from the vast majority of instances, there will always be some lessons that we can learn from it, and we then build that into our response or the way that we operate as an organisation moving forward. And that happens sort of on two levels. It happens internally from the council's perspective, but then similarly from a local resilience forum, we'll have these similar sort of debrief sessions in terms of the multi-agency response. So what we were looking at in terms of the appendix that supports this paper in future is something that just brings out some of those key messages from the debriefs, so that you have that level of assurance that the responses have been the right ones, and also that where we are identifying things that we can improve in future, that we recognise that within this report. Does that answer your inquiry?
Thank you very much. Yes, it does. That's
Thank
very helpful.
Thanks, Janet. Councillor Bill Pipe, any questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Mine have actually been answered, so nothing on this agenda item.
Thank you, Bill. Just a couple of points, Mark and David. It's generally about the actual substance of the report. I'm just minded that, of course, this is a public document, and I think it's always helpful that any acronyms or terms are clearly defined, so that members of the public are aware of, for example, what DART is, which is mentioned on page 25. It's just those little things that I think help the general public to understand the papers a bit more. So if that could be sort of bared in mind for future, that would be great. The other thing is, a large number of these risks are ones which I feel should be scrutinised by one of the two Dorset Council Scrutiny Committees. Do these, Mark, naturally get passed on to them? And if so, it would be very helpful in future presentations if it said, for example, risk 298, this is being passed on to health scrutiny. Comments?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. So first of all, good point in terms of the abbreviations. We'll have a look at that. I mean, it's largely the risk registers tend to work on a sort of self-service basis within the services, but as part of our reporting, we'll double check that through and see whether we can provide some clarity to make sure, any sort of initials are replaced with a bit of text. In terms of the comment about the scrutiny committees, at the moment the risk reports don't go through to the scrutiny committees unless there is a risk that's been identified as part of the performance reporting framework. So at the moment the only committee that's receiving risk reports is this one.
Okay, then could I ask you, Mark, that the next time yourself and David are formulating these agenda items, could they naturally be circulated to the two chairs of those scrutiny committees so that they are aware of its content?
Yeah, happy to do that, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. Don't see any other questions, members. Oh, sorry, Councillor Richard Biggs.
Yeah, just coming back to that point you just made there. I mean, what the scrutiny committees are dealing with is the what is happening about it. So they should be very interested in the mitigations, and that's what they should be looking at. Are they robust? Are they being carried out? And what's the progress on there? That's the key point, because it's all very well having these risks. You know, it's the mitigations that are going to deal with it, and how those actions are being carried out, and that's where scrutiny should be involved. What we're doing is looking at, are they captured? Is the process correct? Is the risk management process robust? I think that's what we do, but we shouldn't really be getting into the, how well the mitigations go. That's not our role. That's scrutiny's, in my view. Thank you.
Can I come in a second, Chair? Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
I think that's a really valid point. And I think I can't remember which risk it was now, but a fair few meetings back, there were one that the committee did delve into, which then was referred back to the Places and Resources Scrutiny Committee for further information. So, quite aside from, I think that the suggestion that we copy the chairs in is a good one, but you do also have that ability, I guess, to, if there's particular risks that you're aware of, you could actually sort of channel that back through the scrutiny committees as a suggestion.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I think this is probably a question for Susan Dallison. The recommendation number 2 is to agree the proposal that future quarterly reporting, etc. Do we actually need to take a formal vote on that to give Mark Eyre the minded to decision, or is that all just part of the noting process?
That's a very good question, Chairman. It would probably be helpful if we just take a minded to decision on that one, just for belt and braces.
Okay, members, we shall do that. I will propose this. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I will second it. Councillor Susan Cocking.
That sounded like Susan Cocking coming through as the seconder. Councillor Bill Pipe, are you in favour?
I am, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Janet Dover?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Barry Gorringe?
In favour, Chairman.
Councillor Richard Biggs?
In favour.
Councillor John Orell?
In favour.
Councillor Mike Parks?
In favour.
Councillor Rod Adkins?
In favour.
Then, Mark, that is a unanimous decision to pass this on to you for the minded to decision.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Would you like to vote, Chairman?
I proposed it.
Unanimous.
I proposed it.
Oh,
I proposed it, Bill.
Well done. Well spotted.
Thank
Sorry,
you,
Mark.
in that case, I would take that as a decision. We will include that with future reporting. Thank you very much for the committee's time.
Thank you very much, Mark. Moving on now, members, to agenda item number 6, which is the appointment of external auditors. I believe this is over to Officer Richard Ironside. Morning, Richard.
Good morning, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, councillors, and good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Ironside in the finance team. This report on appointment of external auditors is for this committee to consider and approve the recommendation to full council for Dorset Council to accept the invitation from PSAA, who are the public sector auditor appointments body, to join their national scheme for auditor appointments. All principal local governments such as Dorset Council are required to appoint an external auditor for 5 financial years from 1st of April 2023. These arrangements also apply to the Dorset Pension Fund. Dorset Council has until 11th of March 2022 to accept the PSAA invitation, and statutory local audit regulations require the decision to be made at full council, which will be at the meeting that's scheduled for the 15th of February. This report sets out a summary of the background of auditor appointment arrangements in section 10 and options for procurement of external audit for the period 2023-24 to 2027-28, and that's in section 11. More detail on the appointment process itself is available in Appendix 1. The existing external auditor appointment was made through the procurement process run by the PSAA sectoral body, with about 98% of eligible local authorities taken up that option last time around. So this will be on the same basis as before for Dorset Council, with all predecessors councils having taken that option. This committee is asked to agree the recommendation to accept the PSAA invitation, being option 3 in section 11, noting the reasons and explanations given in this report, including financial implications as in section 2, such as the level of audit fees, quality of audit and use of councillor and officer resource time, and legal implications as in section 5, including the failure to appoint an auditor, using PSAA in order to mitigate the risks outlined in section 6, including being unable to appoint an auditor and not achieving value for money in that process. I realise that was just a very brief overview of the report, and I thank you for your time. Are there any questions or comments which we can discuss as part of considering the recommendation? Although, as other items have gone, maybe this will be covered as Councillor Hall goes to each member. And thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I'll go through each of our committee members and then on to a point or question from Ian House from Deloitte. So if I start with Councillor Bill Pipe, any questions, sir?
No questions, Chairman. Excuse the cat.
Councillor Janet Dover?
No questions, thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Barry Gorringe?
No questions, Chairman.
Councillor Richard Biggs?
I fully support this. I think what people don't always realise that even if we were to go our own route, we'd probably end up with the same auditors, the only people able to actually do the work. So apart from being very costly to try another route, we'd probably end up with the same people doing it anyways. You know, we went through this in the Fire Authority, but it's obviously something that we do need to review from time to time. But yes, happy with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor John Orell.
No questions, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mike Parks.
And nothing from me, thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Rod Atkins.
No questions, Chair.
Councillor Susan Cocking.
No questions, Chair.
Nothing from me. So Ian House from Deloitte, I believe you wanted to make a comment or ask a question.
Good morning, members. Thank you, Chair. I was going to offer to actually step out of the meeting at that point, because in case you wanted to discuss our performance in relation to this agenda item, but given you haven't, then I think we're fine with that. But would be happy if anybody wanted to ask any questions about the broader market before making a decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Does anybody have any questions about the broader market, or shall we move to the vote? I'll take the silence as no questions. So do I have a proposer for the recommendation, which reads that the Audit and Governance Committee recommends that the Council accepts public sector audit appointments invitation to opt into the sector-led option for the appointment of external auditors to principal local government and police bodies for 5 financial years from the 1st of April 2023. Option 3, section 11.1c. The relevant full council meeting is scheduled for the 15th of February. So do I have a proposer for that?
You do, Chairman. Councillor Bill Pipe.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pipe. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
I'll take Barry Gorringe as the seconder. Councillor Janet Dover, are you in favour?
Sorry, I got it the wrong way around. Yes, I'm in favour, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Biggs.
In favour, Chairman.
Councillor John Orell.
In favour.
I'm in favour. Councillor Mike Parks.
In favour.
Councillor Rod Atkins.
In favour.
Councillor Susan Cocking.
In favour, Chair.
Thank you very much. So Richard, that is a unanimous decision for us to recommend to you the Minded To decision in acceptance of option 3.
That's great, thank you. And the next stage is, as explained, is for us to go to full council. But that's great. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you. Just with reference to that, Richard, could you let me know in advance whether you will be presenting that to full council or whether you will be requesting me as chairman of Audit and Governance to do that? That would be most helpful.
I will do. I'll pick up with other colleagues sort of on the call outside of that and come back to you if that's okay, please. Councillor Hall, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. Right, members, moving on to agenda item number 7, which is the Audit and Governance Subcommittee hearing held on the 1st of December 2021. This is to note, but are there any questions from any members? I'll take the silence as a no, so thank you very much. Agenda item 8 is the forward plan. Do any members have any points or things that they wish to add to the current forward plan? I'll take the silence as a no, so we'll note that. Agenda item number 9 is urgent items. This is today with a PowerPoint presentation of the 2020-2021 accounts by Heather Lappin, who is the Dorset Council Head of Strategic Finance. Good morning, Heather, over to you.
Good morning, committee. Matt, as you mentioned, I'm going to talk through the accounts for 2021, and as part of the presentation, request delegation to approve the 2021 accounts to Councillor Hall as chair and Aidan as section 151 once the audit has been completed. Next slide, please. So what we'll cover in this session, first of all, we'll talk about the statutory context, regulatory background, and then we'll talk about approving the accounts. I'll talk about the performance for the year, the comprehensive income and expenditure statement and movement in reserve statement and their context. Then I'll talk about the impact on reserves, the balance sheet, the cash flow, and then finally the audit opinion. Next slide, please. So what are the accounts? They're a statutory document. We have regulations that surround their content, the format and their timing. They're also an essential component of governance. They discharge a number of fiduciary duties. They're a public document. Information required has already gone into the public domain, and they're subject to an independent audit from external auditors Deloitte. They seek to provide assurance around value for money and the use of public funds. I'd like to say, though, that the accounts are obviously principally backward-looking, a record of what has happened, and the accounts show where we have received our income and how we spend it. Next slide, please. So the key components of the statement of accounts documents is the narrative. This is about what has happened in the year and our performance. The accounting policies that are fundamental to how we prepare the accounts. We then have the primary financial statements, the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, the balance sheet, statement of movements in reserves, otherwise known as the MERS, cash flow statement, the notes to the accounts, and then finally the audit opinion. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what do we do when we're preparing and approving the accounts? Well, we use the SIPFA code, which has been prepared for local authority accounting. We use the current internal financial reporting standards, which all entities adhere to, and the local authority accounting panel bulletins to help prepare the accounts. The accounts have been prepared and required approval under Regulation 9 of the Accounts and Audit Regulations Act 2015. They need to be approved by Council or by Delegation to Committee. The drafted accounts are prepared and signed by the Chief Financial Officer, Section 151, by the 31st of July. Previously, this was the 31st of May, but has been put back due to COVID. To note, Dorset Council's accounts were published and unaudited on the 30th of July. Then we needed to ensure that members of the public had access to the accounts and raise any queries during the audit and public inspection period, which was in August. Approval of the audited accounts were due by the 30th of September, previously the 21st of July, but this has been delayed and Ian House will pick this up as part of his presentation later. As we reported back to committee, they were based on the audit of the 1920 accounts, and so the accounts were approved in July 2021. Next slide, please. So on to the financial statements themselves and the narrative statement. The narrative statement talks about our second year as a new council and our financial performance. The budget for 2021 was a one-year funding settlement, so there was no long-term certainty over the council's funding. Dorset Council had already saved £10 million since its inception and delivered £6 million more in savings in 2021. The net budget of the council was £304 million. There was rising demand and cost pressures in the people services, adults and children's. In Q1 forecast, we were forecasting a £43 million overspend due to the forecasted additional costs of the COVID-19 pandemic. Shortly after that, we started to receive a number of COVID grants and funding totaled £304 million. To put that into context, that's exactly the same amount as our budget allocation for 1 year. Next slide, please. The council's 2021 outturn was just short of £15 million overspend. The main areas of spend was in the adults and children's directorates. As I mentioned earlier, the pressure on adult social care continued to rise, with a key factor being due to the COVID pandemic. This was caused through a mixture of increased acuity and complexity of packages. In children's services and care and protection, the 2021 modelling predicted 177 children who would require placements, and at the end of March there was 180. Other budgets such as SEN transport continued to overspend due to the increase in children who were provided transport as they had an education, health and care plan. The Place Directorate was significantly impacted due to COVID-19 as services in their area such as leisure centres were closed, car parks were empty due to the national lockdowns that were put in place. Corporate Development came out with a £1.2 million underspend due to savings from vacancy management and convergent savings. Legal and Democratic were overspent due to additional costs incurred by the emergency planning team for COVID. Central finance underspent due to increases in the funding that we received in the year. Next slide, please. One of the main documents to the accounts is the Comprehensive Income and Expenditure Statement, also known as the CIES. Whilst the format follows CPMI, it's not exactly the same as CPMI, as such items such as pension costs and capital charges are included when they're not in the outturn report. These are adjusted through the MERS. The CIS shows a net cost of delivering services as being 419.5 million. Other operating items which are not service specific brings this amount down to 450 million. Analysis of funding, council tax, business rates was 420 million pounds. With the adjustment to the actuarial loss on the pension fund, the bottom line was 179 million pounds. Next slide, please. Another important document is the Movement in Reserve Statement, otherwise known as the MERS. The MERS summarises the movement in the performance for the year between the reserves. A lot of the detail of these reserves are included into the notes to the accounts. We have usable and unusable reserves. At the end of 31st of March, we had 38.9 million pounds in the general fund, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. One of the changes to the 2021 accounts was the treatment of the dedicated schools grant, known as the Dsg, the deficit reserve, and that was moved from a usable reserve to an unusable reserve. The Dsg deficit is a negative reserve mainly due to an overspend on the high needs block. At the end of 2021, the cumulative deficit of £39 million went into an unusable reserve. Aidan has mentioned this in previous committee meetings, but I just wanted to highlight as part of the presentation that at the end of March 2023, the statutory instrument stops, and this deficit then is expected to go back to the council to deal with. So then that would reduce our reserves balances. This is a concern to many local authorities, and discussions with the Department of Education about this situation is ongoing. Overall, we have a negative £134.5 million in reserves, which is mainly due to the unusable reserves of the Dsg deficit and the pension fund deficit reserve. Next slide, please. Thank you. So unusable reserves are mainly reserves that are earmarked for a specific purpose or commitment. The general fund started at £30.8 million and closed at £38.9 million. The general fund includes school balances of £7.4 million. The Dorset Council General Fund was £31.5 million. The latest 22-23 budget report proposes that this increases to £33.2 million, which will then increase our resilience. These figures are supported by the notes to the accounts. Next slide, please. The balance sheet. So the balance sheet is now named the Statement of Financial Position. It's a snapshot of the financial position of the council at one point, or should I say one day in time. It lists the assets, the liabilities and the reserves of the council. We've had significant movements in the year, mainly due to the pension fund deficit. The report is based on a single entity rather than a group of entities. Next slide, please. So the cash flow statement shows the cash generation and usage during the year. It shows how our cash was managed during the financial year. Dorset Council had £52.1 million cash increase in the year. £40.8 million was from operating activities, things like cash paid to employees, operating costs and interest paid, as well as income received from council tax, business rates, grants and income and goods received for services. £18.6 million was from net investment activity. This was money that we've received from capital grants and sales of fixed assets, less the purchase costs of fixed assets. £7.3 million net financing. This is where we've taken on short-term new borrowing and have also repaid short-term new borrowing. Next slide, please. Some notes to the accounts are mandatory and some others are there to aid clarity and understanding. Notes are a reference from the main financial statements and how to support them. Usefulness sometimes depends on the reader's level of understanding, and some are obviously more helpful than others. They seek to provide information and disclosure to aid the reader understand the financial performance and position. We've also tried to help as much helpful context in the narrative at the start of the document, and we aim to continue to get better at this too. Next slide, please. For 2021, the draft ISA 260 stated that we would expect an unqualified opinion, and Ian House will talk about this when he presents the draft ISA 260. Last year, we had received a previous qualification issues around the NNDR appeals provision and the value for money for children's services, which have now been dealt with. The auditor will provide recommendations which we've responded to and will be implementing. Some audit findings have already been communicated to officers, and these will also be dealt with. But you might want to wish to reflect on these, but more from Deloitte separately on this agenda. Next slide, please. Thank you for listening to the presentation. Is there any questions or thoughts?
Thank you, Heather. I'll go through the list of councillors. I presume as it's now 11 o'clock, Councillor Bill Pipe will have left. Councillor Janet Dover, any questions?
Chairman,
No
before I go.
Sorry, Councillor Pipe.
And before Councillor Dover takes her turn, I'm concerned about the cost of servicing debt. Do you see the cost of the debt servicing going down or increasing over the next sort of in the final quarter?
I think I would expect it to reduce down, but I could get some more information for you and let you know if that's possible. Maybe at the next Audit and Governance Committee we could provide some further information.
Yeah, that would be good. And on that point, Chairman, thank you very much. And I need to get off to the hospital. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Sorry, Councillor Janet Dover, any questions?
No questions, Chairman, and thanks for the very clear report.
Councillor Barry Gorringe.
Thank you, Chairman. I missed the amount that the pension was in deficit. Could we just go back and just have that figure, please?
Is it are you looking for the cash flow?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the fact that the pension is in deficit. I mean, in other words, if everybody drew their pension out today, we wouldn't be able to cover it.
That's correct. Jim, I can see it on the request to speak, and I think I understand that on the balance sheet it's a £988 million pension liability.
Sorry,
988 million pension liability.
Okay.
Jim McManus, I believe you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, morning everybody. I'm Jim McManus, Corporate Director for Finance and Commercial. I'll answer Councillor Pipe's question first, if I may. He may have gone, but it's relevant. I think his question was, are we expecting servicing costs of finance to reduce towards the rest of the year? Yes, when you see the Q3 finance report, when that's presented to Cabinet tomorrow, you'll see that there's a prediction that there will be an underspend on the capital financing bill, if you like, for the year will be better than budget, and there's some carrying impact for that for next year as well. Just briefly on the pension fund, it's probably worth reflecting that there are particular rules around how the pension fund assets and more peculiarly the liabilities are valued. So the question of if everybody left the pension fund now, would there be enough money left in the fund to deal with it? That's not a question that is related to the way in which it's valuated, which is extremely complicated, and might actually be a question better asked, I guess, through the Pension Fund Committee, which manages that discreetly from Dorset Council itself. But it's the valuation is different from the question that's asked, so it's a bit difficult to connect the two together.
Okay, Jim, thanks very much.
Councillor Richard Biggs, any questions?
Yeah, two really. I usually look at the notes because I find that's always an interesting place to start. And we always have this discussion of how we deal with the PFI schemes, the Colfox School and the street lighting contract. And obviously with Colfox School, I think we've got about 5 years left of that. We would have paid nearly 20 million by the end of that. So the first question is, do we think we've achieved good value for money, bearing in mind that it's an academy school and we're effectively doing the maintenance for them? The second point is on page 47, and it's around the exit packages. We've got a significant one, very significant one. I think it's over 200k. It just says other. I suppose it's not for us to try and dig in to find what it is. I've probably got a guess. I've got an idea what it is or who it relates to. I don't think we want to know that, but is there adequate governance around that decision-making process? Presumably that would have been approved by Cabinet. Thank you.
Aidan, I think you're looking to answer this one.
Yeah, thank you. On the exit payments, so in terms of in principle, when a member of staff is made redundant, there's depending on their age, there's a strain on the pension as well as the actual cost of redundancy. So each individual that's put forward for redundancy, we have a business case. We look at the cost of the exit, as I've just described, and compare that to their salary costs. And so we look to have a business case and a sort of a rule of thumb of around as long as there's sort of the payback is within 2 to 3 years, as in the salary savings sort of more within 2 to 3 years have paid back the cost of that redundancy, then it's seen as appropriate. I have responsibility as Section 151 officer to sign off all high cost redundancies, and the relevant portfolio holder is involved as well. Thank you. And the other question around value for money of PFIs, I think there's probably the jury's out on that nationally as a policy, isn't it? And in terms of where we are on our own PFIs, the two that we have, Colfox and the street lighting, I think we sort of continue to keep close to them. In particular, the street lighting, we've been able to make some adjustments over recent years that have been beneficial to us in terms of having a financial improve the finances for it. So I think in terms of value for money of PFI contracts, the issue is not one of just signing the contract and letting it go. As long as we actively manage the contract and see it as a contract management responsibility, then we are able to continue to drive value from those contracts. Yes.
Did you want to come back on anything there, Richard?
No, I'm content with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor John Orell, any questions? He's gone silent. Councillor Mike Parks, any questions?
Nothing for me, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Rod Adkins.
No, Chair. Good presentation and good answers. Thank you.
Councillor Susan Cocking.
No questions for me, Chair. My questions have already been answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather, I'm not sure if this is a question for you or for Aidan. My understanding is that your presentation is just that, it is a to note presentation. Is that the case, and when did you want to do the vote on the schema delegation? Did you want to do that now or after Ian's ISA 260 report?
Chair, if it's possible now would be helpful. I think Aidan's.
Aidan, yes.
Yeah. If just in terms of good governance, I think what we're trying to do is get the external audit isn't complete. I think we need to hear an update from Ian about the status of that external audit, and then once members are in the full view of the understanding the accounts that Heather's just done so well, understand a view from the external auditor, and at that point, if the committee are comfortable, then seek delegation for both you as chair and me as Section 151 officer to sign off the accounts once the audit's complete. So we need to understand Ian's status first, if I may.
Okay, thanks, Aidan. Thank you, Heather. That was a fantastic presentation, and thank you for the answers. Right. Then we will move then on to Ian House's presentation from Deloitte, our external auditor, on the ISA 260 report. Over to you, Ian, and good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Good to see you. And I will try and take you through this update report of where we are with the progress with the audit. I think what Aidan suggested is exactly right. If you take this report, you can then make a decision in the round in terms of the progress on the audit. So if I could go to move forward a couple of pages, please. Perfect, thank you. So I'll just stop there, and so just take you through the audit. We've done all of the substantive testing we intend to do. There are a couple of minor information requests outstanding, usually with a third party, like there's an investment confirmation we're just waiting for, but generally the detailed testing of the audit is complete. We're in the process of finalising the reviews of all that work. But as Heather said, the really good news from this audit is that the previous qualification on the numbers, which was in relation to the NNDR provision, is being removed. That's because the provision is no longer material to the accounts because it's been reduced since the prior year. And we're convinced from the work that we've done that there's highly unlikely to be any understatement in that balance, and therefore it's not going to be material to the accounts, and therefore there will be no qualification on the numbers in the accounts based on the work that we've done so far, which is, I think, a much better position to be in. And as Heather has also said, we intend to remove the qualification on the value for money conclusion, which related to children's services, reflecting the progress that's been made in that area and reports from regulators which recognise the significant progress made by the council. Again, that came forward from the previous county council and was in last year's accounts, and likewise with the NNDR provisions, some of that was in the form of districts and came forward. So to see those being resolved very much in the way that they have, I think, is excellent progress that has been made. As Heather said, the audit is late, not uncommon across the country, and there's a huge issue with audit resource, and working in a COVID environment has really slowed down the audit process. Although I do feel it has been a much smoother process this year, and we certainly will be signed off earlier than last year, and obviously we aim to continue to improve that progress as we move forward. So that's important. The key judgments areas that we looked at in terms of the audit were the valuation of your property assets. As you know, there's a program to go out and get valuers to value those assets for you, and the methodology is quite complex and different depending on the types of assets. We looked at the completeness of accrued expenditure. Normally in an audit, you're looking to recognise in a company audit that they've only recognised revenue, income that they're due. But in the context of local government, where money either comes through the provision of grant or collection of council tax and NNDR, etc., we feel the risk is more around understating expenditure, and therefore that's where we focus it, and particularly around making sure that accrued expenditure at the year end, so things that you've incurred the cost of but haven't had the invoice for instance, making sure you're correctly accounting for all of that you should be in the year in question. We just talked about the valuation of the pension scheme liability, as Jim has outlined. It is a very complex calculation done by actuaries to come up with a number of the potential liability in the fund, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in the number of assumptions in there. But I can tell you now, before we even go into that detail, that we're happy with the assumptions that the valuer, the actuary, has used to value that liability. And then finally, we didn't set this out in the plan. When we did the plan, we didn't really recognise a risk around COVID income, but as you will be aware, during the year there were significant amounts of COVID income given to the council by central government, but also a significant number of different grants, all of which had slightly different conditions, and therefore we recognised in the year that we needed to do more work around those grants, particularly whether you account for them as a principal, i.e. you've had some say in how they're used, or as an agent where effectively government's given them to you and you just pass them straight through without any influence on where they're spent. That's a very simplistic view of the complex accounting for agent v principal, but that's the gist of it. And therefore we've gone through each of your grants and looked at them and compared them to how they've been treated elsewhere as well. And we've got a couple of minor adjustments we would have suggested to that, but when you see that later on, you'll see that they're not material to the accounts, and therefore they're remaining unadjusted in the accounts that you saw today. But as I said, they don't materially change the view of the accounts, because some went one way. We thought they were treated as principal and they should have been agent, and vice versa. So that's how we've gone through that. So as we say, when we complete the work, we expect to issue an unmodified opinion, which is really important, and no reference to any issues in relation to value for money. Our value for money work will go on after we issue the opinion on the accounts, and we will produce within 3 months of signing the accounts what's called an auditor's annual report, which will give our narrative on what we think the arrangements in the council are like in relation to value for money. So that will give more detail on that area. At this point, we're just trying to say, is there any significant risk to our opinion or any areas that we need to bring to your attention, and there aren't. We've been to the annual governance statement and made sure that reflects what we think is going on in the council, so we're very happy with that. And we've got no issues to raise in relation to your narrative report, which, as Heather said, is an area where you really get the chance to describe what has gone on in the year covered by the accounts. Heather also talked about the period where the public can inspect the accounts and then potentially object to numbers in the accounts on the grounds that they feel they're unlawful. We didn't have any of those formal objections this year. There is a letter from the member of the public that I'm dealing with, and I need to just complete that before we can sign the opinion. But that's a slightly complex area that I'm just trying to work out what exactly we need to do to respond to that, because it hasn't come through as a formal objection or question to the accounts. If I could have the next page, please. Whole of government accounts. After we've done the accounts, we'll complete a return and sign off a return to the NAO, which sort of summarises the accounts. But that's just to let you know that work is ongoing, will be done after we've signed the accounts. And I've already talked about the change in relation to COVID. If I could move on, please. And then move on from that slide, please. Just on this slide, I'll point out to you that we calculate a materiality level. That's a level at which an error in the accounts, we think, of that scale would influence the decisions of somebody reading the accounts. Now, it is a big number, but then the council spends a lot of money and has a lot of assets and liabilities on its balance sheet. This year, we've calculated the number to be 14.8 million. It's a reflection of your revenue expenditure. It's slightly higher than last year, but in the scheme of things, I don't think that change makes a difference to how people would interpret the account. So just for you to be aware that if there's an error of less than that, and we didn't think it was qualitatively material, so we're just saying in terms of numbers, if it's not bigger than that, we don't think you would need to change it, and that wouldn't change the view of the user of the account. So that's an important number in the accounts. Next page, please. This just summarises the significant areas that I've already talked about. We found a few. We'll move through each of those just quickly as I move through it. So if I could go to the next page, please. So recognition of COVID grant income, I've talked to you about that. There were a couple of differences between how you had treated the grants and how we felt they should be treated as agent v principal. As I said, they're not material and they're included later on in this report as unadjusted misstatements. But otherwise, we were fine with what you've done. There is one issue with this, in that the NAO have raised a qualification on the departmental accounts in relation to COVID-19 grant fraud. It's quite unusual that you're still auditing a council and then the departmental level, the highest level, have been qualified. So we're just trying to work through whether there's any implication for the local government accounts for that. It doesn't change what you've done. The NAO estimate is clearly not specific to individual councils, but we do just need to work through the thinking on that. As I say, that's something that's going to be national and not related specifically to yourselves. Next slide, please. And the next one again, please. So completeness of accrued expenditure. As I said, that was to make sure you'd accounted for all the expenditure you should in the year. The testing is complete and there's nothing to report on that. We're just reviewing the work at the moment, but I don't expect there to be a major change from that work. The next slide, please. Valuation of property assets. This is a very complex area, as I said earlier on. We have found a couple of issues with that, and if I could go to the next slide, please. Oops, sorry, just back up a touch. There we are, thank you, perfect. So we identified an unadjusted misstatement. Again, it's an error we found, but it's not material in relation to the valuation of car parks. Car park valuation is based on the income that it generates, but also the expenditure of running that car park, and all of that gets built into a valuation. And there were just some errors in terms of how the expenditure in relation to running the car park had been taken account of in the valuation. And there was also something where a valuation had been put through and hadn't reversed historical impairments in the prior year. Again, both of those not material adjustments, which we've summarised together, and a few smaller adjustments, but in the nature and value that you're talking about in terms of revaluation, not a significant level of issues there. Management overrider controls the next risk. This is assumed in every audit. We assume that management could manipulate the accounts because they're in that position of power. We do a lot of work around journals and estimates in that area, but we have nothing to report to you and no evidence of management override of control was found. If I could go on to the next slide, please. And the next as well, please. The pension liability valuation, that £988 million figure, just to explain to you that that comes in as a liability on the balance sheet and then is matched by an equal and opposite reserve at the other side of the balance sheet. So it's a big number in the accounts. There are other entries that go through the comprehensive income and expenditure statement and are reversed out to make sure council taxpayers are not paying for this estimate of future liabilities. They only pay for current costs. It's a slightly complex area, as I say, but one that we spend a lot of time making sure it's done correctly and making sure it doesn't influence council tax. If I could just go to the next slide on that. So as Jim said, this is a complex calculation done by the actuaries. What we've done here is set out the benchmarks that have been used by your actuary to calculate the pension liability. So your things like discount rate, the future value of cash, the retail price index, assumptions around how that will change over the future, CPI, inflation increases, salary increases over a long period of time that we're looking at, increase in pension payments and pension deferment, etc. So we look at those numbers used by our actuary and the percentages used, and we compare them to the benchmarks that we've got. And in each of those cases, we felt the numbers used by our actuary were within the range we would expect to see. And different actuaries may be at different ends of that range, but as you can see, mostly yours are in the area that we would expect them to be in. So that is how the liability is calculated. We think it's a reasonable range and a reasonable number, but it is based on a huge number of assumptions looking far into the future, and therefore it can vary year on year by tens of millions of pounds, and indeed it has changed significantly from the prior year because of slight changes in the assumptions. But we've done the work on that, and so far we're happy with that. We're just going through the final review processes, and we have some work done for us by our pension audit team, which we rely on in the main council audit, and we're just waiting for that finalisation of that work. But that work is complete, so it should be very shortly with us. Next slide, please. I won't run through any more in terms of COVID. Obviously, we've thought through the main area, which is the COVID grants, but also looked at that in terms of your provisions for bad debt as well. Value for money I've covered quite well in terms of removing that qualification that was on the value for money conclusion. So I think that genuinely reflects the huge effort that has gone in children's services. We then got quite a number of pages which look at the control deficiencies that we found, recommendations we made, and you will see that management have already put in a response to those. So I won't go through each of those in detail unless you want to come back to those later on. We can discuss any that might be of interest to members. So I've been brilliantly led through those. Thank you. Just to mention, in terms of liaison with internal audit, we obviously review their work. They've done quite an amount of work in terms of children's services. It was very interesting to see their work in that area, but we don't totally rely on their, we don't rely on their work for our detailed testing. We do that ourselves. Thank you. Nothing else to report to you on that page. This just says that we will have an unmodified opinion. That's our expectation at the moment. Again, the value for money will be unmodified. And there are no matters we need to bring to your attention. Oh, sorry, could I just go back up one slide, please? So in the 1920 accounts, all councils had a material uncertainty in relation to the valuation of their assets due to COVID restricting market movements. In some cases, that is no longer there in the 2020-21 accounts. In yours, your valuer has retained that uncertainty, and you have disclosed it in a note to your accounts. So it's very clear to the reader of the accounts that COVID is still impacting the market in the view of your valuer, and that increases the uncertainty in relation to the valuation of assets. Doesn't change our opinion on the accounts, but we will, in our opinion, just reference that fundamental uncertainty that is disclosed in your accounts. So all we say to the reader is, when reading our opinion, you should also read this note to the accounts in relation to the valuation of property assets. I should bring that to your attention. Could I move on, please? And I won't say much on that page, thank you. We can move on from that one as well. And the next slide, please. So these are the unadjusted misstatements. We've got no adjusted misstatements that are of a nature we need to bring to your attention. So we just bring to your attention the unadjusted. You will see the net effect of those is all less than our materiality level, and therefore we believe, should you choose not to adjust those, it wouldn't change the reader's view of the accounts and unduly influence their decision that they might make based on the accounts. There's some detail there. I've already talked about the car park valuation, the reversal of historic impairments which hadn't been done, and the fact that your pension specialist hasn't included anything for the Goodwin case, which is a sort of discrimination case, and the provision for setting that right. It is quite difficult to define because the exact nature of reparation that will be made is not clear. We've estimated that it would, our specialists have said it'd be no more than 0.2% of the defined benefit liability. So we don't think that's a material adjustment, but we've raised it there as well. Have the next slide, please. There were a few disclosure misstatements which are set out here for your attention, but I won't dwell on those. Just confirming we are independent of the council, that we have no relationships that impair our independence, and we have no other fees other than those for the audit, and one fee in relation to the audit of a teacher's pension agency claim. Next slide. There are the fees set out. Obviously the fee is set under the public sector audit and appointments procurement, which we discussed earlier on. And you'll see we've got a fee for the council, a fee for the pension fund, and then the teachers' pension agency, and that brings the total to 205,000. We may need to discuss with the council some fee variations in relation to the VFM, which is a scope change from when we originally tendered for the council's audit under the PSAA contract, and is consistent across all councils. And there's some consistent levels for that as well, but we'll discuss that separately with officers and come back in a final version of this to confirm any variation to that fee. I think that's really the key areas I wish to bring to your attention. There's a little bit on fraud later on, but as I said, we've detected no fraud as a result of our audit, and we identified fraud risks in relation to the understatement of grant income and in relation to COVID-19 grant treatment, but we didn't discover any instance of fraud within the council as a result of our work.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for your report. Any questions, councillors? So, Councillor Janet Dover, any questions?
No questions, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Janet. Councillor Barry Gorringe.
No questions, thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Richard Biggs.
Yes, just one, and that's around how you view non-tangible assets. There's a lot of detail about physical assets, but I don't know how you deal with, and if you do deal with them at all, things like IT licenses, long-term contracts which have contingent sort of value there, which is not insignificant, and we may well have licenses that we pay for that are not actually used, so that'll be useful to know. Is that something you look at?
Thank you, Councillor. Generally, what we do is we look at how material the balance is. We look at any changes in the year. So if there's been a significant addition in the year, then we would pick that up and look at, is it right to capitalise those assets? It's becoming a more complex area, particularly as people are using software as a service type arrangements rather than the old-fashioned Microsoft licensing or that kind of thing. But we would tend to focus it only on it if there were significant changes in year and new additions going into that area. We didn't do a huge amount of work on it this year from what I can recall. I'd have to check if there was anything, but there was no issues coming out of it, I'm sure of that.
Did you want to come back on anything, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's fine. It's just concern me. We don't really know the number, and it could be many millions involved in that non-tangible assets. I just want, do we have a handle on it really? Maybe it's something more for internal audit. I don't know. Okay.
Certainly, we find. Yeah, we certainly find that organisations find it useful from time to time to do an audit or make sure there is some system in place to monitor the number of licenses in use, and that you're getting value for money from that. That you are using the total number you need. You've got the total number you need. So one risk is you haven't got enough licenses for the number of users you got. The other is the converse that you raised, Councillor, which is you've got too many licenses for the people using it. And there are sort of software systems in order to log and manage that, but we haven't looked into that this year in terms of the audit.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor John Orell, any questions?
Page 16, the question is about the assumptions on inflation. Are these optimistic? Because I'm hearing reports that inflation could be higher, and how this might affect our pensions in particular and our general assumptions on setting budgets in general.
Yeah, it's certainly a very good question, and one that is taxing people at the moment. I mean, this is taking a very long-term view over inflation, so it is quite difficult to project that, and short-term views around what is happening at the moment will play into that, but obviously it's taking a longer-term view of the impact over a period, and that's what the actuaries do, is they have models to project that. You may well see a slight change to that in the next year, and even a 0.1% of a change to that number can make a significant difference to the liability, but it may be offset by other changes in other areas, and that's why it's always very complex, is you've got a number of assumptions all acting one way or the other on the liability, but based on what everybody's doing at the moment, those are reasonable assumptions that we believe are in place for this year. As I said, we may see a shift as time goes on and inflation starts to perhaps show a longer term upward trend.
Thanks, Ian. I believe, Aidan, you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And if I could just sort of continue on from what Ian's just said around inflation, because going to Cabinet tomorrow is our budget proposals for next financial year, and they do acknowledge the significant increase in inflation, not just in RPI, but in particular sort of around energy and utilities as well, for example, as well as care prices. So Councillor Orrell makes a really good point. Inflation is increasing, certainly that's what the forecasts are, and we've adjusted next year's budget accordingly. Thank you.
Thanks, Aidan. Councillor Mike Parks, any questions?
Nothing for me, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Rod Atkins, any questions?
Nothing from me, Chair, thank you.
And Councillor Susan Cocking, any questions?
Nothing from me, Chair.
Ian, my question probably is more actually for Aidan or Jim McManus or Heather as to whether they actually wish to comment on any of the points within the ISA 260, and in particular on page 27, item 10, where it talks about advice being given between Deloitte and Dorset Council. Just wondering whether that advice has been sought and been given.
So if I could respond initially from a Dorset Council, from a finance perspective, we were pleased to see this report. You know, it feels like Dorset Council is making progress in terms of the quality of its financial reporting, the quality of knowledge and information, and our processes as well. So whilst there are a number of recommendations, they're all very helpful recommendations, and we've got the management response alongside them, it does feel like it's part of a continuous progress that we're making, and these recommendations aren't so so concerning as some of the ones that we've had in previous years. So first of all, we welcome this report, and secondly, in terms of the situation around SAP, which is our sort of main finance system, we've got when we got these recommendations or comments last week from Deloitte, we had a quick get together with the IT team who manage SAP on our behalf, and we're working through those recommendations. So they're really helpful.
Okay, thank you. If you could just stay on, Aidan, just I think that's obviously the end, as no more questions are coming through. Thank you very much, Ian, for this. Am I right, Aidan, that this is a to note item? We don't need to vote on it, and do you have the wording for the schema delegation?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I've put the proposed wording in the chat bar. So for members of the public who can't see the chat bar, I'll read that out in a second, if I may. So yes, it's to note the state of the accounts at the moment, to note the report that we've had from our external auditor, and then the proposed recommendation is for the committee to delegate authority to the chairman of the audit committee and the section 151 officer to approve and sign off the financial statements for the period ending the 31st of March 2021 once the external audit has been concluded. Now, if the external audit identifies the requirement for any material amendments to those statements, then we would these should be reported to the audit committee prior to signature. So that's the proposed wording. It's wording that a recommendation that we adopted at a similar stage last year as well. So I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Aidan. Any questions from any members? I'll take the silence as a no. Do I have a proposer for that?
I'm happy to propose, Chairman.
Councillor Mike Parks is proposing, and seconding by?
I would second it, Councillor Cocking.
Seconded by Councillor Susan Cocking. Councillor Janet Dover, are you voting in favour?
Yes, I am, Chairman.
Thank you, Janet. Councillor Barry Gorringe, are you in favour?
In favour, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Biggs, are you in favour?
In favour.
Councillor John Orell, are you in favour?
In favour.
I am in favour. Councillor Rod Atkins, are you in favour?
In favour, Chair. Thank you.
That is unanimous. Jonathan, you've come up on the screen. Are you wishing to say something at this point?
Yes, Chairman. It's in relation to the officer delegated decision that would follow then from the view that the committee had expressed. Simply that I don't think it would be appropriate for Aidan to delegate to himself authority to assign the to approve and sign the financial statements with you. So I think it's probably better if I step in at this point and on behalf of the Chief Executive exercise his delegated authority in relation to this rather than Aidan himself.
Okay, then Jonathan, I believe that is unanimous, so therefore the minded to decision is over to you.
So, Chairman, I've listened to members' comments, I've listened to the full presentation, and having listened to the decision that members would have been minded to make if this had been an in-person meeting, my decision is to grant the delegated authority that we've already referred to yourself and to the section 151 officer to approve and sign off the financial statements for the period ending 31st of March 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you very much, Ian, for your presentation and for your and your team's help with the accounts. That's the end of that agenda item. The final agenda item is exempt business, which I believe there isn't any. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all members and officers and, of course, Ian and our SWAT members for their help in this agenda and committee meeting today. Thank you all for your time. Could I just ask for Susan Dallison and Aidan Dunn just to stay on for a couple of minutes, please? Thank you, everybody, and have a good week.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.